not a lot of people are aware of, that 70% of all liquid honey has actually been adulterated, a lot of times economically adulterated, cut like drugs.
So how there's no such thing as organic honey, right? And that's mind-blowing to me.
Consumers keep seeking honey out, but they're being served a fraudulent product and they're not aware.
You were telling me the numbers of how much of what you're actually buying from the store that's in a jar or a squeeze bottle is not really honey.
I mean, it's the third. It's olive oil is number one, which most people know about olive oil fraud. Milk globally actually is second most fraudulent.
Thanks for being here. Welcome to Behind the Skew. But we'll just get right into it. I mean, just tell everybody who you are, what you do, and what you guys are building over there.
Sure. Douglas Raggio. I'm the founder of Pass the Honey, which is a individually portioned regenerative cut of honeycomb. I'm really leaning into convenience to encourage trial for new customers to taste honeycomb for the first time, bringing it in a convenient format so we can expand use occasions throughout the day, kind of taking it out of the fine dining experience and out of the home charcuterie, home hosting environment, and making it truly a snack and a garnish that anyone can use throughout the day. And that could be on top of pancakes, waffles, toast, biscuits, acai bowls, smoothies. We have a couple coffee garnish programs working with some retailers, food service operators. It can be on top of steaks, hot honey pizzas, obviously desserts, cocktail garnishes. It's shockingly universal. So, the format really is introducing new consumers to the category. We've done a lot more supply chain work than I ever imagined. So we have the only outcomes-based regenerative standard for honey. Some of the misnomers in honey is that there's organic. There is no organic certification for honey because you can't fence or feed a bee. Organic is based on inputs. Beekeepers are going out of business because there's so much fraud in the honey space that not a lot of people are aware of, that 70% of all liquid honey has actually been adulterated, a lot of times economically adulterated, cut like drugs. And then, just because of the amount of fraud coming in, it's driving the price of liquid honey down and forcing beekeepers to essentially make or break their industry on pollinating monocrops, which doesn't provide for the best beekeeping practices. We worked for numerous years with UC Davis to develop a regenerative platform that is honeybee health, beekeeper livelihoods, and ecological impact. Outcomes based, so we measure. We're launching 5 pilots in the US with a number of partners. I'm currently raising money for that as well under the nonprofit arm, which is really an industry advocacy, policy, research component to push the industry a little forward, maybe show it new revenue streams, create standards that they can stand behind to command a premium in the market. So a lot of this is deeply vertical supply chain work that shows up in the consumer's hand as a cute little honeycomb in a cup.
Yeah, and there was a lot of what you just said to really unpack it in that. But what's really interesting about your company is that you guys aren't obviously just a honey company, right? You're not just filling a bottle and putting it on the shelf. And there's a lot bigger reason, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, but if you can go into that, because I more specifically will kind of start at the beginning of what you said about the organic side. So how there's no such thing as organic honey, right? And that's mind blowing to me. So I don't even know what that means, because you think of organic and then the way you kind of briefly explained it, but just go deeper into that. Tell me more about how that's not possible.
So organic as a methodology, the National Organic Program, the NOP from the USDA, so there's a lot of acronyms there. The NOP is based on where the animal grazes, what's put on the crop. So it's all based on inputs. You cannot control where a bee goes, what a bee flies through. Sure, you can be on an organic farm, you can be on a regenerative farm, but if your neighbor's spraying pesticides, or it's even downwind from pesticides, you have a lot of this almost, it's a canary in a coal mine. A honeybee travels and collects for so many different spots. It's like this little vigilante to see what's happening actually in the ecosystem. But it makes it incredibly difficult to truly state where honey is from. The teddy bear, when it came out, I think it was in the 70s, it really exploded honey consumption. And at that point, fraud and consumption just kind of went hand in hand up and to the right, which again, that level of fraud pushes pricing down to where domestic US beekeepers can't make a living on liquid honey any longer. They just can't compete on price from all this fraudulent imports that are being brought in. There's an estimate that there's $1 billion of damages, economic damages to American beekeepers due to fraudulent imports. I personally think the number's a lot higher. We're putting things in place through the nonprofit to really identify where the damages may be, how to mitigate them. And that brings us back to kind of starting fresh with UC Davis and saying, look, we don't have organic guidance. We have heavy fraud. What do we do? Like, I need to make sure I'm providing our customers, consumers, the highest quality honeycomb. Now, honeycomb as an item can't be heated, can't be blended. So two of the most fraudulent practices can't be applied to honeycomb. It's singular in the sense that it is what it is. A honeybee pollinated thousands and millions of flowers to put that honey in that cell, and nothing's touched it until it hits your mouth, which is pretty unreal in our current food system, that there's something that untouched that came from a flower through an insect. And we are, it's incredible. And it's all the medicinal benefits of honey, or the health benefits of honey, is why consumers keep seeking honey out, but they're being served a fraudulent product and they're not aware. And that's where we try to use honeycomb as a wedge. Once you try honeycomb, a lot of older generations remember honeycomb from their youth. It's just, we were closer to our food system. It was less processed food, in the 50s. So boomers remember and start telling stories of their childhood. Younger generations have never seen it because we've gotten so far from our food system. And so honeycomb has this really unique position to say, hey, just people are curious about it. So when they ask, what do you do with this? What is this? Can you eat it? Those all open the door to saying, well, that's where honey comes from. It has terroir like wine because it's coming from flowers and regions. So it's going to taste a little different than what you're getting out of a jar that may have multiple sources and blended and heated and is just a shadow of its former self. And that's something that I speak a lot on, is that liquid honey is still a very heavily processed category. I mean, you're spinning it in a drum, which creates heat to get the honey out of the frames, and then you're heating it to blend it. And every time you're heating it, you're removing nutritional benefits, right? That's common knowledge. And so that's a hot process to blend it, and you're blending it from multiple sources. And then because there's so much pesticides, they actually have to run it through filtration. And so they'll hydrate the honey to about 4 times its volume. So it's not even considered honey anymore. It has too much liquid in it, too much water. And they'll push it through diatomaceous earth, which then rips out all the pesticides, but also is ripping out a lot of the pollen, all the way to, identify where it's from and most of the nutritional benefits that consumers are seeking. And then after it comes out of the filtration, it gets put in a hotline into a jar. It's like, what are you really getting when you're buying something at a large retailer? It's just a really difficult industry. And so we're trying to, again, use honeycomb as a catalyst for impact, as this wedge to have a different conversation, to educate on honey fraud, really educate on the role of bees in our food system, but also that beekeepers are producers too. People forget that beekeepers are agricultural producers. And just last year, domestic beekeepers lost 60% of their hives. That number applied to cattle, chicken, anything, almonds, would be alarm bells for any other industry. And for some reason, people think, oh, they're insects. Well, it takes a while to regenerate a hive to make it strong enough. There's just a lot of work that had to be done that no one else seemed to be doing, by sheer nature of the fact that we need the cleanest honeycomb with the best beekeepers and the best environments. Just makes it a lot easier, because then we can just keep buying the honeycomb if it's meeting our standards. And all of a sudden we're giving more income and revenue to beekeepers domestically and globally, essentially creating the market for honeycomb, all because, the convenience format, and that we focus solely on honeycomb. We are a honeycomb company. There's a lot, on the back end of it, but I don't envision ever seeing past the honey on a jar of liquid honey, ever. It's just, I'd rather stay in the comb and keep it simple and really establish that as the next raspberry or the next kiwi or the next acai or dragon fruit. Same, but it's that level of branded commodity that we're really pushing towards. And it's been amazing to see retail sales data and also the food service side picking up as a customization or an upsell on a pancake stack or a hot honey pizza. It's just this way that, we're showing retailers how to make money with honeycomb. We're showing food service operators also how to make money with honeycomb, while also educating the consumer on, what it actually is and how to use it. So it's more than just a supply and demand equation. It's actually doing work on both sides, where had I started a smoothie company or an energy bar company or a probiotic soda company, categories, even soda as a whole is established. Honeycomb's just absolutely nascent right now, but changing, hopefully due to us.
Yeah. And me and my wife, we're huge on honey. We have honey all the time. So, but it was shocking, when we first spoke, when you were telling me the numbers of how much of what you're actually buying from the store that's in a jar or a squeeze bottle is not really honey, or it's just cut with so many different syrups and things like that, even though the bottle says honey.
Yeah.
It's really not,
It's
which
hard to
is
test.
extremely,
Yeah. I mean, that's where I suggest either buying honeycomb, obviously, or just finding local beekeepers. Farmers markets, we usually have one or two beekeepers, minimum. And
absolutely.
that's where it's still difficult in the sense that bees can fly up to 6 miles, if the wind's at their back. And a lot of these local beekeepers don't have the millions of acres required to ensure, for the nonprofit side, the Regenerative Apiculture Working Group, we started partnering with large timber holdings, like private families that have owned large timber companies for hundreds of years, looking at the geographic adjacencies to pesticide, looking at historical wind patterns and drift components, making sure there's enough forage for the bees, making sure there's water access for the bees, and then access for us to manage the hives. We started with almost 13 million acres to start. And then there was 1.1 million acres that we could actually use in 5 different parcels. And on the largest 500,000 parcel, there was only about 10 places we could put hives that could meet all those criteria. It's more of a landscape management and landscape design, not even design, just identification of where we can get the honey that is completely removed from industrial agriculture. We're a heavily, mechanized industry over here.
Yeah. So you guys partner with a lot of other like smaller kind of beekeepers, but do you guys have like your
We don't
own
own a single hive.
beekeeping?
We partner with a co-op in Turkey, which met our standards after we came out with UC Davis. We then had to find someone that can meet those standards. And that was a group in Turkey that I had a personal relationship with from a previous life. And so there's 380,000 plus hives, almost 400,000, I think now. I think it's like 1,600 beekeepers, third generation. It's just it's a different food system over there. There's also a kind of a civic pride or heritage on beekeeping in that region. So they've just done a lot more progressive, bee positive legislation and beekeeping practices. And with that, now we're working with groups in Australia, Mexico, Canada, Hungary, and United States. And the real goal is my ultimate aim is to be supporting our US business between US and Mexico beekeepers. Keep it North American and then do the same thing globally. Just really try to hyper localize the honey just because there's benefits to that. As negligible as it may be, there's still a lot of benefit to doing that and keeping things in this little hives, mimicking the bee perhaps.
Yeah. Again, is that just from a standpoint of like about it, like I tend to buy local honey from farmers markets and things because it helps with my allergies because of the pollen in the area that I'm in. I'm in Georgia, so it's extremely heavy with pollen during this time of year. Between the allergy medicine and then the 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 local honey, it helps significantly. Is that kind of what you mean? Like keeping it localized? There's probably
Not to that level.
not just products, but kind of
Yeah,
also the same the environment.
not to your level. All honey has antihistamine properties. All honey is antifungal, antimicrobial, antibacterial. Okay. Are you eating enough honey locally for it to have any impact on your allergens? Maybe, maybe not. I kind of equate to like I take a gummy vitamin C pill, and it's like, is that really doing much for me, or is it just making me feel better? Hey, teach your own. I'm speaking more about just from supply chain, keeping things localized, just for ecological impact from our business operations and not, trucking things back and forth around the world or shipping them or flying them or whatever we need to do. I do think there's something where we can create the market for honeycomb, create the standards for regenerative, and then share those standards with, producers, beekeepers, and then create the market for it. That's the kind of larger play that we keep aiming towards.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, and these for sure hold a huge part of our ecosystem that I don't think you realize. So it's kind of cool that not only are you doing that, but also like looking at it from kind of that like carbon footprint, ecological side of limiting that. So it's kind of a double there.
Yeah, that's the plan. It's working so far. Slowly. It does, I can't create an industry overnight or a category overnight. So it's a lot of plodding and, monotony and little wins and little setbacks. And it's just, the nature of the business. I don't think I'll have a restful day probably the rest of my life because never in a million years thought honeycomb would be like my thing. But hell, I'm probably the only person in the world that's thought about honeycomb, the links I have.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk about that. Like, how did you come across like having that moment where you were like, I'm going to start a honeycomb company and then start pioneering and brutally being honest about the reality of of the industry. Like, what was that like for you, that moment that you decided to do that?
I can't place my finger on any one moment. There was no aha that I'm aware of. I was a consumer of liquid honey, and I was buying liquid honey to make honey lemon ginger teas to boost my immunity during, I was going through kind of a rough patch in work. And I knew about honey fraud through watching a Netflix documentary of all things. And it was called Rotten. It's the first episode. It goes into honey fraud. I just thought it was like, well, this sucks. Here I'm actively buying things that are trying to heal myself. I have one of these items is just, highly suspect. I decided I was going to buy honeycomb. So I was a honeycomb consumer and I bought a big, brick, 14-ounce brick. It attracted ants on the counter. And then I, bought another one and tried to put it in the fridge. And I wasn't going to thaw it before using it. And thinking was, why isn't this convenient? And I'd worked in food and beverage long enough to know that, format change can really unlock some things. And in us as an agricultural, and we're a seasonally harvested agricultural good. There's no processing what we do. We're a cut pack facility. So we're no different than a berry or an apple in that sense. It was just, I thought like baby carrots just kept playing. Like the baby carrot came out. It was just, I guess people were too lazy to cut carrots or spear them. And sure as hell, like it just next carrot consumption. And, being in the food industry, if you start to see these little things, it's like, oh, wow, like I'd buy more of those cherry tomatoes in that little like plastic cherry tomato dispenser thing I buy. Like it's just funky to work in these agricultural goods and then to put some packaging innovation, against it with a focus, like a hyper focus. And that's where, you can buy honeycomb in different formats. There's no shortage of that. But really the unlock is just making it convenient. That's what I wanted, was I thought it was convenient. I also thought I could license the patents to beekeepers and just make some easy mailbox money. And I couldn't even find a beekeeper in the US to sell me honeycomb in any significant volume, because there's the bioaccumulation of pesticides in the wax, that they just keep running these hives around the United States, pollinating monocrops and just exposing bees. And so most commercial beekeepers don't even use real wax foundations, which is like where the typical honeycomb looking structure is called a foundation. They'll use plastic foundations. That way the bees aren't expending any energy other than just flying around pollinating monocrops. So the whole industry has really shifted itself from an equipment process revenue perspective around pollinating monocrops. And now we're just saying, look, we're going to build the infrastructure for comb cutting and packing, and we want to buy the highest quality honeycombs. Here's our quality standards. And then we work with the nonprofit to really set those standards with the industry. Because not being a beekeeper, I didn't want to be the person dictating quality. Like I'd rather listen to the industry. And we're going to go further as an industry. We're going to do it together, not just one knucklehead out there selling honeycomb. So matching the demand that we're creating in retail and food service with the supply side here domestically, it's requiring a lot of infrastructure that I just didn't think we'd ever have to take on, but we are, because it makes sense for us.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of how you talked about, like when you bought honeycomb, you had it in the fridge, you had it on the counter, and then, I've done that. I've bought honeycomb and just kept it in my cabinet, and it was okay. Is there a shelf life to it, or does it go bad after a while? Okay.
It'll crystallize.
Yeah, that did happen. Yeah. Absolutely. That did happen. Yeah. It kind of crystallized, got a little bit harder. And so like putting it on toast or something was a little more
difficult. And some people love it. This is where early on, I'll just own it. Like I tried to control things a little too much. I was like, this is exactly what we need. But then it's kind of like looking at a banana. People buy bananas at different stages of ripeness. It's just like to each their own. And some people like darker honeycomb. Some people like crystallized honeycomb. Some people like light yellow. Some people like, brood cells, which is like an actual bee being, grown in a cell. Our standards are universal in the sense that they are outcomes based, and we make sure the bees are healthy and the beekeepers getting paid well, and we're not, leaving the environment as a negative. It's net positive what we're done. Those are kind of the main tenets. And they're still being developed and expanded upon and kind of ratified, if you will, with the nonprofit. But I don't try to control the crystallization too much. Again, knowing that some people grab it, where we display in a large dump bin in produce departments, which is another deviation from the norm for honeycomb. Most times you'll find honeycomb in the honey set. But what we realized early on was that no one's buying honeycomb as a sweetener. They're buying it as a snack or a garnish or a pairing, a complement to another item. Just use the word garnish universally. And the other placement you'll see it in stores is in a deli. That's typically you're hosting a party. You want to have a charcuterie board. You buy the big brick and you drop it on the board. But how many times are you inviting 8+ people over to your house? Like it just the use occasions aren't there. And again, we are a seasonally harvested pack agricultural good that has a direct impact on the produce department. So like, why aren't we in produce? Every season, my rates change. Right. So again, depends on how much honeycomb's available, depends on weather, rain. So having our home in produce was one of the bigger unlocks for us, is that not only is it just what we are, we're the berry, not the jam, or the apple, not the applesauce. It's one way to look at it. We're the cut origin, we're not the processed derivative. But then also the consumer is just buying it voraciously there. We have stores doing over 90 units a week in a dump bin. And I've never seen numbers like that before. And part of it is because we're probably new and curious. We also taste great. And also, I think we're onto something. I think there truly is this, like, somewhere in the near future, we're going to have an avocado toast like moment in the food service channel. That's just going to put Comb on the map. And we just keep trying things until that day comes.
Yeah, I think it's close. I think many restaurants I go that having brunch or breakfast, usually they have something on the menu that has honey in it. Now, are they using the comb? Probably not.
Yeah.
But I think once people start to become more educated on the fact of how the honey that typically you're buying in the bottles at the store is not really real, I think there will be, especially in this day and age where we're, especially in eras, millennials, like, we scrutinize everything that we consume and that we touch and that we put in our bodies for the most part. And so learning about this for me is like shocking. And I was telling my wife about it the other day from our first conversation, and she was like, "Wait, what do you mean? What do you mean it's not real?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's not real. Like, it's just like cut with syrups," and it was like blowing her mind.
It's the third. It's olive oil is number one, which most people know about olive oil fraud. Milk globally actually is second most fraudulent because they add whitening agents. Not a concern here in the States, but honey is. It's just processed stuff. Somebody's trying to take 1 barrel of honey and turn it into 20, and charge the same price. And it's really hard to test for stuff. So we use nuclear magnetic resonance testing to the parts per billion. We do a pollen analysis and a match to verify it's from the regions we've qualified in Turkey and soon to be the US. So yeah, it's a lot more work than you would just think, just to be like, I'm going to buy honey. It's a global commodity. It should be easy. It's like, well, it also tastes different because, again, we're harvesting honeycomb, right? The honeycomb we just got out of Australia didn't taste anything like what our honey tastes like. And is it even palatable to the U.S. consumer? Don't know. Not going to risk it right now, but that is something you have to figure out. Is it just the early years of the avocado were very similar in the sense there was, multiple varieties of avocado. There's multiple varieties of honey and honeycomb because depends on what the bees are pollinating. So avocado honey is almost black, which is just trippy. It's just, that's how it comes out. There's hallucinogenic honey, in these high mountainous regions of Turkey called Turkish mad honey that just has some sort of, I don't know, depends on what the flowers were. And so that's been the fun and painful part, is that, yes, we've created the demand, but we've also now created a flavor profile that we have to stay somewhat within for, our primary business. And then looking towards the future, really educating the consumer on, there's a sparkling grease honey. Like, I would love to get a sparkling clear honeycomb. Like, how rad would that be as a limited time offer? But that we'll get there. The consumer will get there with us in the time it takes them to get there. For now, we just keep saying, look, this thing's honey. This is what real honey tastes like. We're doing a lot. Here's the math. Here's the test. Fully transparent. And just trying to raise, the whole tide for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. How has that been, like, obviously going into starting something from the ground up, and then you're definitely going against the grain of the rest of the industry and kind of like pioneering the new way of the way that the honey industry is going. And I'm sure a lot of those bigger companies that produce the non-real or very cut processed honey probably are a little pissed off that you're out here exposing them all.
I don't know, man. We charge an awful lot. I wouldn't be surprised if the price of honey comes up and fraud increases before it decreases, just by the nature of seeing what it costs us and how we communicate it. We are not, and that's been probably one of the more difficult, is you have our price per unit at retail, which is $6.99 for, 1, 2, 3 bites, depending on who you are. And then liquid honey is like 13 cents an ounce. It's like, well, but what are you really getting? You don't really have an experience with liquid honey like you do honeycomb. And you mentioned about restaurants kind of having something that has honey on it. using a honeycomb as a garnish food service environment is really an interesting way to draw the guest closer to agriculture and like the actual other items on the plate. And I've never seen people engage with a garnish like they do with this. And storytelling starts, questions start flying. Someone at the table knows something about something, or had an uncle that was had a beehive, or a neighbor, and like all of a sudden you're like in this storytelling. It's like, wow, like, there's really something that's memorable about a honeycomb, either when you first time, or if this is now your first time experiencing it, or you biting into it for the first time. It's memorable. It anchors your memory. And I think when you get that chance to marry kind of a first taste with a piece of education, which is the honey fraud or the role of bees or beekeepers, you start to anchor that in people's minds. And that will be, if we can have some role in that, 15, 20 years out, then I can, be a very happy man. Not that I'm not already. I think that's like that, like, oh, we did something pretty interesting. And you asked about like what it's like being kind of a small fry in a big pond, and not being a beekeeper gave me a lot of latitude to try things that people said couldn't be done. Like any other founder, enough naivety to keep me going. And then I was further along the path when it got really tough to like, I'm beyond turning back at this point. We service major retail and it's growing on its own. It's just a matter now of buttoning up the operations side and finances to make sure we can, sustain this thing forever. I don't see an exit. I didn't raise money in that sense. It's all friends and family. And I see us being the Driscolls or Zespri of honey. Those are two behemoths that are in kiwis and berries. And I don't see why we can't stand shoulder to shoulder with them. Take us some time, but that's the trajectory. And that excites me. It's been a really rough year, not going to lie, personally and professionally. And it's just a big enough problem to keep me engaged on enough areas of my life to not be bored on any given day.
Yeah. I'm sure that, there's complexity in general of leading a company and being a founder, but yeah, then, the complexity of what goes on, like you were saying, it's so unpredictable. I'm sure you've probably experienced it where some days you get a call, hey, we've had an issue with this hive, and we're not going to be getting any honey from it anytime soon, or something happens.
Oh yeah, always.
Yeah, like I actually did pest control when I was in college, just working, and we had a couple of customers that had beehives, so they were like personal little bee farms, and I remember one specifically where he had an issue with carpenter ants that kept coming in and killing his bees. And so we had to come up with a way. Yeah, I don't know why they just kept coming in and just killing his bees and eating their honey, I guess. But we had to kind of come up with a way to figure out how to resolve that and kill the carpenter bees or the carpenter ants without killing the bees and using pesticides. So
what was your solution?
Really interesting. One was finding the hive, and it was quite extensive, not the beehive, but the ant hive. And so and it took a bit of time because obviously we couldn't use any kind of liquid pesticide or anything like that. So eventually finding the hive that was under some plywood that he had outside nearby his hive, but they were kind of all over in the ground. And we had granules, so kind of anyone has ever seeded their yard for grass, stuff like that. And you spread them out, and essentially, if it gets wet, it will then seep into the soil right there. So essentially what happened over many treatments of that. And thankfully we had the plywood too, so we could spread the granules out and then cover it with the plywood. We'll wet it with a hose and then cover it with the plywood, and it would seep into, and also they're just there. So sometimes the ants themselves, they would actually eat the granules and it would kill them that way. And then in contact with them too, it would kill them. So as they're crawling around it and touching it, it would kill them. So, and then eventually we got rid of them. It took a few months. It took some time. And not being able to use the liquid pesticide was definitely a challenge for sure.
Well, you were sharing. I thought I'd talk about pest control in a honey business, but hey, I love it.
Yeah.
It's a dirty word. They're not pests, but yes, I hear you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You said something earlier.
Well,
forget. There's something you'd mentioned I was going to elaborate on, but keep going.
No, just kind of curious. I know you kind of mentioned like where you want Pasta Honey to be, being a staple and not, maybe taking over the honey industry eventually, or becoming that kind of staple that is being used in culinary and all of that, even if it's not Pasta Honey, which hopefully it is, but at least Honeycomb itself. Where are you seeing like Pass the Honey maybe 5 years or 10 years from now? What's that vision look like of like what actually has happened for you and the company?
I would love Honeycomb to be a daily use occasion in some manner, some shape or form. Looking at things like the raspberry, I think blueberries are a little higher consumed, but raspberries and kiwis, I think like it's something you pick up on every shopping trip. Or you're buying at least once a month. It doesn't have to be a sweet treat. It doesn't have to be a special occasion. And that's really where I would like it to be. And a lot of that is building the supply side up so we can keep bringing our costs down. But right now, there's just limited supply, and that's the dynamic that we are in. So where do I see us? I hope that the nonprofit is really supporting the domestic apiculture industry in a sense that like there's proper lobbying and there's proper standards and methods and systems and testing for the industry as a whole. That would be a big one. Sourcing all of our comb from US and Mexico, and for at least the North American market, would be a huge win. And I think it's doable. It's going to cost some money, like I said, like infrastructure wise and cutting packing facilities. But just there's that people know wonderful pistachios. They know cutie and halo top or halo clementines. They know Driscoll's berries. They know Zespri kiwis. I would like us to be known as Pass the Honeycomb. Like just that Kleenex type lane where if it's the first time someone's experienced it and we're the only brand out there merchandising it, we're bringing a bit of the CPG playbook to the agricultural world, not too much, but enough to where we can keep increasing use occasions. And that's both in a restaurant, food service, high volume production setting and in, a day-to-day from a single man or woman to a single mother and father or to a family of 10. There's reasons to put honeycomb on something and make the moment special. It really can, as a chef says, it can zhuzh up, a simple meal, like you can put a toaster waffle with the honeycomb on top, and all of a sudden the kids are engaged in breakfast. And that was just they call it bee spit, bee vomit. Kids go nuts about bees. They like bee facts. So I think there's really something special there. So in 5 years that, and then we are sponsored the National Spelling Bee as well. And I think getting that program really up and running and doing that every season, engaging the youth to know the role of bees and pollinators and beekeepers in our food system around words. I think words are important. If you can read, spell, you read a little bit more and educate yourself a little bit better. Literacy is important. So that, 5 years is a lot of road for us to anchor ourselves in the produce department, anchor ourselves in the consumer's mind, advocate and establish policies and standards for the industry, while also engaging the youth through the spelling bee. And then culinary, we have a culinary ambassador program that's like a little baby lamb right now. It's getting its legs. So I think getting that going and really working with food service operators as we I have a couple right now in the works where we're doing like a beverage program or a cocktail garnish program. And really wanted to find someone to do a hot honey pizza program, honeycomb as a centerpiece to a hot honey pizza, because then it's Instagrammable, right? People take pictures of it. You become the spot that's known for the comb. Just again, slowly nicking away at that, but 5 years, we should be pretty firmly set in the food service channel. So a lot of growth, a lot of purpose in the next 5 years.
Yeah, it's really cool. And then the spelling bee, that's hilarious.
A fun one. Hasn't really got its feet yet. We got to find a retailer that wants to go in and do that like really full tilt. We've had some spits and sputters with starts on that, but I also don't have a marketing person. So once we get a brand comms person in the mix, that'll be a task for that individual.
Yeah. No, it'll be really interesting to see where Pass the Honey goes. But Doug, it's been a great conversation. I think people will really find this very interesting, especially to learn a lot about honey that they probably did not know, which I did not before we talked. So, but before I let you go, like let people know where they can find Pass the Honey. Website, store, like retail.
We don't do any e-commerce. You can find about us at freshhoneycomb.com. We're in Albertsons, Kroger's, most banners underneath there, Safeway, NorCal, Albertsons, Vaughn's Pavilions in SoCal, hopefully again soon. But we are on the Ralphs down there, United Texas, United Supermarkets there. We're in Acme in the East Coast. Wakefern kind of comes and goes. So if you're a Wakefern shopper, go, put a request in. Yeah. That's really conventional groceries where we're at, and we'll slowly get elsewhere.
Awesome. Well, Doug, thanks for being on Behind the Skew.
Thank you.
It's very informative, very educational, and I'm sure there's probably like 1,000 other things you could tell me about honey. And so we'll have you back so we can talk about those.
Love it.
Even more, because I'm sure there's a lot.
Scotty, it's been a pleasure. You're great. I appreciate you guys doing this.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks.